My name is Lynn Dooley. In this series of videos, you'll see volunteers from the Marin County chapter of the League of Women Voters who will fill you in on the 11 state ballot measures and one regional measure that will be on your November 6th ballot. Please note that the League is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support specific candidates. The League does, however, take positions on some issues. You can see some local candidate forum videos on our website, marinlwv.org. Our goal is to present you with a clear, unbiased overview of each ballot measure. This is the result of the work of 20 volunteers from the League who have reviewed all the material available to create these summaries. You will hear the question of the proposition, the situation, which is the issue background, the ballot measure proposal, the fiscal effects, if there are any, what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, the arguments in support and the major supporters, the arguments against and the major opponents, and if available, an update on candidate spending. For your convenience, the propositions are grouped for your ease of viewing on our website. The League of Women Voters offers you some tips to help you evaluate measures and ballot propositions on the ballot. First, check to see if it is too complex for a yes or no answer. Is it the right solution for the problem? Is it well written? Paid for? Who paid for it? Does it create new problems or restrict the state budget? And it is always helpful to follow the money. It's also helpful to learn who is really opposing and supporting the issue and what do they have to gain. The California Legislative Analyst's Office can provide you with extensive, non-biased information on all ballot measures. Keep in mind that initiatives can only be amended with other initiatives. And finally, is the measure introduced by the legislature or is it a citizen's initiative? Each come to the ballot in different ways. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Ozer, and this is the Marin County Measure AA, the Transportation Tax Renewal. To pass, this measure needs a 2/3 vote. The question, should the current Marin County's half-cent transportation sales tax be renewed for another 30 years, beginning in April 2019? The current situation. In 2004, Marin County voters approved Measure A. This 20-year measure authorized the collection of a half-cent sales tax to be used to fund defined transportation-related projects within the county in 4 categories. It included 1, local bus transit, 2, highways and interchanges, 3, local streets and roads, and 4, school safety and access. To date, these dedicated funds have been used to fund projects in all these 4 categories. These projects are managed and administered by the Transportation Authority of Marin, which is also known as TAM, T-A-M. The current plan is 15 years old and does not allow the sales tax to be spent on a variety of new needs, including adding a Highway 101-580 connector, the completion of the Marin-Sonoma Narrows project, the infrastructure needs of sea level rise, or the accommodation of electric cars. Marin County also receives transportation-related funding from the regional bridge tolls and the state gas tax and vehicle registration fees. However, it is important to note that the large majority of money from these sources fund county transportation projects other than those identified by Measure AA. The proposal. Renewing the existing sales tax will provide funding for high-priority transportation needs without imposing any new taxes on Marin County voters. This revenue source will provide a long-term, reliable transportation funding stream and create an opportunity to invest funds to support local needs and priorities. The sales tax renewal funds the following categories. It reduces congestion on Highway 101 and improves interchanges. Maintain, improve, and manage local transportation infrastructure. Reduce school-related congestion and provide safer access to schools. Maintain and expand local transit services. Fiscal effects. Measure AA is estimated to generate $827 million over a 30-year period, or $27 million per year. A yes vote will renew the present half-cent transportation sales tax for 30 years, beginning in April of 2019. It will fund defined projects in 4 categories. It'll allow TAM to review the measure projects every 6 years and, if appropriate, and with the consent of the majority of Marin City Councils, to modify the funding plan to accommodate changing needs. Continue to provide a Citizens Oversight Committee and an annual audit to ensure that TAM is allocating and spending funds consistent with the measure approved by the voters. A no vote means leave the existing half-cent transportation tax measure in place until 2024 or when changed in another election. Ensure sales tax revenues can only be spent on those projects defined in 2004 sales tax measure. Supporters say Measure AA will reduce congestion and greenhouse gas emissions, maintain and improve the local transportation infrastructure, provide a high quality of transportation options for people of all ages who live, work, and travel in Marin County. Supporters include Congressman Gerald Huffman, the Marin County Board of Supervisors, the League of Women Voters of Marin, the Marin County Fire Chief. Opponents say Measure AA will not solve traffic congestion problems in the county and would be growth-inducing. There are 6 more years of the current tax plan. What's the rush? The 30-year period is too long. Even with periodic 6-year reviews, voters should be able to formally vote on major changes to the measure. Opponents include Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, the Transportation Solutions, and the Defense and Education Funds. Thank you.
I'm Doug Cooper, and I'm here to give you a quick introduction to bond propositions. On the ballot, bond propositions are always listed first. Bonds are a way that governments and companies borrow money. The state uses bonds primarily to pay for construction and renovation of infrastructure projects such as bridges, dams, prisons, parks, and schools. California sells bonds to investors to receive the large upfront funding needed for such large projects, and then repays the investors with interest over a period of time, usually 30 to 40 years. Some bond issues must go onto the ballot for voter approval. Other types do not. General obligation bonds are paid for by the state general fund and require voter approval. Revenue bonds are backed by committed income resulting from the completed infrastructure project, such as a highway or bridge tolls, and those do not require voter approval. For November 6th election, there are 4 general obligation bond propositions to consider. The first 2 were placed on the ballot by the legislature. The other 2 arose as public initiatives. Together, these measures would authorize the state to borrow an additional $14 billion if voters approve of all of the proposed props on the ballot. The Legislative Analyst's Office projects that would increase the portion of the annual general fund revenues that must be set aside to pay for bond debt by less than 0.5%. So now let me introduce Proposition 1. You'll see this listed on your ballot as authorizes bonds to fund specified housing assistance programs. The question, should the state of California be given permission to borrow $4 billion in general obligation bonds to fund existing housing programs, loans, grants, and projects to build affordable housing and to subsidize home loans for veterans? The situation is this. California has a severe housing shortage for both rental and home ownership. An average house in California now costs 2.5 times the national average, and the average rent is about 50% higher than the national average. In 2015, California had 21% of our nation's total homeless population. It also has the largest number of veterans who are homeless, 24% of our nation's veteran population. The proposal. Proposition 1 aims to provide housing assistance to people in California who most need it, including low-income people, farm workers, working families, people with disabilities, seniors, and veterans. The state offers programs that provide local governments, nonprofits, and private developers with grants or low-cost loans to fund a portion of the housing construction costs. The measure would distribute $4 billion in bond revenue for the Cal Vet Home Loan Program, affordable multifamily housing programs, and would support infrastructure, home ownership programs, and farm worker housing programs. The fiscal effect of this proposition, if passed, the funds would be used together with other government monies to provide housing assistance to low-income working families and to leverage federal dollars for construction of new housing. The cost to taxpayers for $3 billion of these bonds would be about $5.9 billion over a 35-year period. The other $1 billion in bonds is set aside for veterans, and so those bonds would be repaid as the veterans pay off their loans. A yes vote authorizes this $4 billion in bonds to be issued. A no vote opposes authorization of issuing these bonds. The supporters say, yes on Proposition 1 would provide relief from the housing crisis that is taking its harshest toll on veterans, hardworking families, seniors, and people with disabilities. And that Proposition 1 will provide an economic boost as construction funded by bonds creates jobs. The primary supporters include the Chan Zuckerberg Advocacy, the Building and Construction Trades Council, the California Association of Realtors, California League of Women Voters, Marin Board of Supervisors, San Francisco Chronicle, Press Democrat, Sacramento Bee, Marin IJ, California Chamber of Commerce, California Federation of Teachers, and the Sierra Club. Opponents. Opponents say Proposition 1 will help a very limited number of people and is just another general obligation bond measure that will cost California taxpayers billions more in debt. The major opponents are Gary Wesley, an attorney in Mountain View, California Republican Party, California Taxpayers Association, Libertarian Party, and the Peace and Freedom Party. Campaign funding, so far, Affordable Housing Now, in support, has raised $3.4 million. There have been no funds yet reported to the state as being raised for the opponents. Now let me turn to Proposition 2. You'll see this on your ballot as authorizes bonds to fund existing housing program for individuals with mental illness. The question is this: should the Mental Health Services Act be amended to permit backing of $2 billion in bonds to fund the No Place Like Home program? The situation is that in 2004, California voters approved the Mental Health Services Act, a 1% income surtax on people earning over $1 million per year. Then separately, in 2016, the legislature authorized $2 billion in bonds to provide supportive housing for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness and suffer mental illness. Their intention was that these bonds would be paid for using some of the tax revenue coming from the Mental Health Services Act. However, none of these bonds have been issued yet because the matter is tied up in a lingering lawsuit over whether such use of Mental Health Services Act funds was really in place in the original legislation. And since that was a ballot proposition, fixing that means it has to go back to the ballot again for public approval. So now the intent of Proposition 2 is to get beyond that lingering lawsuit and indeed go get public approval. This proposition would ratify existing law establishing the No Place Like Home program as being consistent with the intentions of the Mental Health Services Act. And Proposition 2 also amends the Mental Health Services Act to authorize transfer of $140 million of revenue annually, about 7% of the MHA, the Mental Health Services Act annual revenue, to back issuing of $2 billion in bonds for supportive housing under the No Place Like Home program. The fiscal effect. Passage is expected to have no direct effect on the state budget because the bonds are to be financed from revenue already generated by the Mental Health Services Act taxes. It is estimated that the bonds would be paid off at approximately $120 million each year for 30 years. A yes vote means the state could make this use of existing mental health funds to pay for housing for those with mental illness who are homeless. A no vote means the state's ability to use existing mental health funds to pay for housing for mentally ill homeless would depend on the outcome of the lingering court decision. Supporters of this measure say, this proposition was placed on the ballot by the California legislature and was not controversial, passing the Senate 35-0 and the Assembly 72-1. This would mean a shift of 7% of Mental Health Services Act revenue from mental health services to provide supportive housing for our most at-risk residents. Prop 2 reflects an ongoing trend toward a housing-first model for caring for the mentally ill homeless. Major supporters include the National Alliance on Mental Illness of California, California Chamber of Commerce, California Democratic Party, California Republican Party, California League of Women Voters, California Police Chiefs Association, Marin Board of Supervisors. And media support has come from the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Mercury, Santa Rosa Press Democrat, Marin IJ, and the Sacramento Bee. Opponents say, Proposition 2 spends money on buildings instead of on badly needed treatment. Counties can already use some Mental Health Services Act revenue for housing severely mentally ill patients. Opponents include the Contra Costa chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness and the Libertarian Party. Campaign funding. Major funding in support has come from Affordable Housing Now, a coalition primarily of housing and construction organizations, and the California Association of Realtors, a total of about $3.4 million so far. No major funding in opposition has yet been reported. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Soo-Young Kim, and this is Proposition 3. You'll see this on your ballot as authorizes bonds to fund projects for water supply and quality, watershed, fish, wildlife, water conveyance, and groundwater sustainability and storage. The question, should the state sell $8.9 billion in bonds to fund projects related to water supply and quality, watershed and fisheries restoration, habitat protection, water conveyance, and groundwater sustainability and storage? The situation, California's water supply faces challenges. The amount and location of available water varies widely from year to year. Unusually wet or dry years can result in local flooding or water shortages. Water may be polluted and unsuitable for any use. Over the past 17 years, voters have approved $31 billion in general obligation bonds for various natural resource projects, including $4.1 billion from Proposition 68 in June of 2018. Of this amount, the state still has about 1/3 of those dollars, about $10 billion, available to pay for new projects. This includes the $4 billion that was approved through Prop 68 in June 2018. The principal and interest on general obligation bonds are repaid from the state's general fund, usually over 40 years. The proposal. This measure authorizes $8.9 billion in general obligation bonds for various water-related programs and projects. The proposition's broad spending categories include water supply and quality, fish and wildlife habitat, water facility upgrades and repairs for specific projects in the Central Valley, Bay Area, and Oroville Dam groundwater recharge and storage projects. Most funds will be distributed as grants to agencies that must provide equal matching funds. The measure provides reduced cost-sharing requirements for projects benefiting disadvantaged communities. Fiscal effect. Bond repayment is expected to cost the state an estimated $7.3 billion over 40 years. The effect on local governments will depend on the size of any grant received. Savings are recognized because a grant reduces the local share of a project's cost. However, a project could also increase future operating costs, such as for a new desalination facility. The net effect annually for local governments and ratepayers is likely to be small. A yes vote authorizes $8.9 billion in general obligation bonds to support this proposition. A no vote opposes the authorization of $8.9 billion in bonds to support this proposition. The supporters say Prop 3 includes money to repair the Oroville Dam and other dams to keep people safe and hold more water. Prop 3 will improve water supply by cleaning up contaminated water bodies, restoring forests and wetlands, and improving aquatic habitats. Prop 3 protects disadvantaged communities by providing funding for clean, safe drinking water, a basic human right, and Prop 3 gets California ready for the inevitable next drought without raising taxes. Supporters include Californians for Safe Drinking Water and a Clean and Reliable Water Supply, the California Chamber of Commerce, the Association of California Water Agencies, California rice, pistachio, almond, cotton, and citrus growers, the Nature Conservancy, the Agricultural Council of California, Dianne Feinstein, the National Audubon Society, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and the Marin Board of Supervisors. The opponents. Opponents say that Prop 3 was written with the help of corporate interests, opening the way for large sums to be spent on ambiguous or environmentally harmful projects, things that have nothing to do with solving the state's water shortage. Prop 3 has weak oversight, continuously appropriates funding with little accountability. Prop 3 shifts the cost for water from end users to California taxpayers. Prop 3 will give funds to disadvantaged communities with no explanation of who or where they are. And Prop 3 has no money for new dams and allows the shift of building and repairing canals from companies to the taxpayers. Opponents include the Sierra Club, the California League of Women Voters, Friends of the River, the California Taxpayers Association, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Marin IJ, the LA Times, Sacramento Bee, and the San Jose Mercury News. Campaign funding. A total of $5 million has been contributed in support. The top 5 contributors are the California Waterfowl Association, Ducks Unlimited, California Wildlife Foundation Fund, Western Growers California Fresh Fruit Association, and no funding has been spent in opposition to date. This is Proposition 4. You'll see this on your ballot as authorizes bonds funding construction at hospitals providing children's health care. The question: should the state of California issue $1.5 billion in general obligation bonds to fund grants to qualifying children's hospitals for construction, expansion, renovation, and equipment projects? The situation: in 2004 and 2008, California voters approved initiatives authorizing the sale of general obligation bonds to fund improvements to children's health facilities by making grants to qualifying children's hospitals, primarily private, nonprofit facilities. Prop 4 continues the program. The proposal: Prop 4 would raise $1.5 billion through the sale of general obligation bonds. 8 designated private, nonprofit children's hospitals would be eligible for 72% of the funds. 18% would go to the 5 University of California Children's Acute Care Centers, and the remaining 10% to public hospitals and private nonprofit hospitals that care for children eligible for California's Children's Services programs. Fiscal effect: state taxpayers would repay a total of $2.9 billion, which is made up of the original $1.5 billion bond and $1.4 billion in interest to be paid back over 35 years. In addition, taxpayers will pay the costs of issuing the bonds, up to $6.5 million, and for unknown administrative costs of the managing authority. A yes vote means the state could sell $1.5 billion in general obligation bonds for the construction, expansion, renovation, and equipping of certain hospitals that treat children. A no vote means the state could not sell the $1.5 billion in general obligation bonds proposed for these purposes. Supporters say that Prop 4 helps over 2 million sick children each year and leads to better health outcomes. Previous bonds have been used to add more beds and purchase new technology. Supporters include the California Children's Hospital Association, the California Chamber of Commerce, California Teachers Association, the California Democratic Party, and numerous California local politicians, including Gavin Newsom, Alex Padilla, and Adam Schiff. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Marin IJ, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, the Sacramento Bee, the San Jose Mercury News, and the LA Times also support. Opponents. Opponents say that taxpayer money should not be used to support private hospitals. Primary support will go to the 8 private, nonprofit hospitals supporting this proposition. Only one of the 8 designated private nonprofit children's hospitals, Stanford's Lucile Packard, is located in Northern California. Marin County private nonprofit hospitals treating California Children's Services patients would be eligible to apply for grants from the 10% pool, but are not guaranteed to receive any bond funds. Opponents include attorney Gary Wesley, the California League of Women Voters, the California Republican Party, the California Libertarian Party, and the Peace and Freedom Party. Campaign funding. California Children's Hospital Association, including the 8 qualifying California hospitals, has contributed $10.9 million in support. No dollars have been contributed to the opposition of Prop 4 to date. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Dooley, and this is Proposition 5. You'll see it on your ballot as changes, requirements for certain property owners to transfer their property tax base to replacement property. The question, should the California Constitution be amended to allow home buyers who are age 55 or older or severely disabled to transfer their tax assessments from their prior home to their new home, no matter the new home's market value, the new home's location in the state, or the number of moves? The situation. Taxes based on the value of real property provide a major revenue source for local governments, schools, and special districts. Proposition 13, a 1978 constitutional amendment, limited property tax increases to 1% of assessed value and increases to 2% per year. Reassessment to market value is required for newly purchased or newly constructed property or if ownership changes. The assessed value of a prior home may be transferred to a replacement residence of equal or lesser market value if the replacement home has been purchased within 2 years of the selling of the prior home and is located within the same county or in a county that permits inter-county transfers. These exemptions from reassessment triggers are allowed for homeowners over the age of 55 who have a severe disability or but they have some restrictions and can be used only once. The proposal. Prop 5 would expand a homeowner's ability to transfer assessed value to a new home. The market value of the replacement home could be of greater or lesser value than the prior home, and the house could be anywhere in California. The homeowner would not be limited to a single exemption. Prop 5 also applies to situations in which the original property is damaged by a declared disaster or made unusable by contamination. As an example, the Joneses, now age 75, bought their suburban home in 1968, 50 years ago. If they bought it for $25,000 and the assessed value increased at 2% a year, per Prop 13, it would now be assessed at $50,000 and its annual tax would be $500. Its market value now could easily be $600,000. If the Joneses sell their home for $600,000 and buy another home for $600,000, their new property tax rate would remain at $500, not the $6,000 the rate would be for a younger homeowner less than 55 years old. The fiscal effect on local governments. Prop 5 would have a net effect of reducing local revenue by $100 million per year at first, and then grow to $1 billion deficit over time. Increased home sales would generate property transfer taxes of tens of millions of dollars, while county administrative costs would rise by tens of millions of dollars at first. The fiscal effect on schools. State spending would have to compensate for the consequent losses of most schools, meaning most of the revenue burden of school districts would have to be shifted to the state to avoid reduction in school budgets. A yes vote means that the yes vote supports amending Proposition 13 to allow home buyers who are age 55 or older or severely disabled to transfer their tax assessments with a possible adjustment from their prior home to their new home, no matter the new home's market value, the new home's location in the state, or the number of times the buyer moves. A no vote means that it would oppose amending Proposition 13 to change how tax assessments are transferred between properties for home buyers who are age 55 or older or severely disabled. Supporters say this amendment to Proposition 13 provides seniors with greater flexibility to move, sell, or trade up their home without a substantial property tax increase. Proposition 5 would ease up California's severe housing shortage by encouraging owners to place long-held homes on the market. Supporters include the California Association of Realtors, the National Association of Realtors, California Chamber of Commerce, California Taxpayers Association, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and the California Republican Party. Opponents say that Prop 5 doesn't add housing and will make it harder for cities and counties to pay for schools, infrastructure, and public safety. Proposition 5 provides special tax benefits to higher-income senior property owners. It does nothing to help low-income seniors or families struggling to find housing. Opponents include the California League of Women Voters, the California Teachers Association, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Marin IJ, the San Jose Mercury News, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, the Sacramento Bee, and the California Democratic Party. Campaign funding and support. $13.2 million has been contributed from the California Association of Realtors and the National Association of Realtors in support. $1.76 million from the SEIU California State Council Political Committee, the California Teachers Association, and the California Supervisors Association in opposition. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jim Ozer. This is Proposition 6. You will see it on your ballot as eliminate certain road repair and transportation funding, requires certain fuel taxes and vehicle fees to be approved by the electorate. The question, should the increase in vehicle fuel taxes and fees enacted by the legislature in 2017 be reversed, and should the Constitution be amended to require voter approval of any future transportation-related taxes and fees? The situation. In 2017, lawmakers passed by 2/3 the Road Repair and Accountability Act, known as Senate Bill 1, SB 1, increasing state funding for transportation purposes from $6.6 billion in 2016 to $12.1 billion in 2018. By 2020, when all the taxes will have been in effect, Senate Bill 1 revenue is estimated to be total $5.1 billion annually. On November 1st, 2017, state fuel excise taxes per gallon increased 12 cents for gasoline and 20 cents for diesel. Also, a new transportation fee was added to the cost of registering a vehicle, including a fee for electric cars starting in 2020. After July 1, 2020, fuel excise taxes will be adjusted for inflation. Voters restricted the new Senate Bill 1's tax revenues to transportation purposes by approving Proposition 69 in June 2018. The proposal, Proposition 6, would repeal or remove the fuel tax increases in vehicle fees enacted by Senate Bill 1. Amend the state constitution to require any future legislatively imposed taxes on fuels and vehicles to take effect only if the voters of the state vote to approve it. A yes vote repeals or removes the fuel tax increase and fuel fees and amends the state constitution. A no vote means it leaves the increased gas tax and vehicle registration fees approved by the legislature and the governor in effect. The fiscal effects. If Proposition 6 is approved, Senate Bill 1 transportation tax revenues will be reduced in the 2000 to 2019 from $4.4 billion to $2 billion. After that, Senate Bill 1 will no longer exist and transportation tax revenues will be reduced by $5.1 billion annually. According to the legislative analysts, the loss of funding will affect state highway maintenance and rehabilitation, local streets and roads, and mass transit. The Transportation Authority of Marin estimates the approval of Proposition 6 would result in the loss of $8 million annually for county and city roadways, maintenance revenues, and the loss of additional $7 million or more for county-related transportation system revenues. Adding the requirement that most transportation-related taxes must also be approved by the voters will make it more difficult to impose such changes in the future. Supporters say gas taxes and fees are too high, fall the hardest on hard-working families, and are unnecessary in a state that has a budget surplus. Tax increases on gasoline that directly affect people's lives are too big for just the governor and legislature to decide. Supporters include the California Republican Party, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, U.S. Speaker of House Paul Ryan, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Opponents say cracked, potholed roads pose a major safety threat to California drivers. 89% of counties have roads in poor or at-risk conditions, and more than 1,600 bridges and overpasses are structurally unsafe. Reliable transportation infrastructure is critical to get Californians to work, move goods and services to the market, and support our economy. Opponents include the Marin County Board of Supervisors, the California Democratic Party, the California Chamber of Commerce, the California League of Women Voters, the Sierra Club, and the California Bicycle Coalition. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Marin IJ, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, the Sacramento Bee, San Jose Mercury, and the LA Times. Campaign funding. $4.4 million has been contributed by the Yes on Proposition 6 PAC and Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association in support. $31.5 million has been contributed in opposition by the California Alliance for Jobs, Rebuild California, Labor's Specific Southwest Regional Organizing Coalition, Issues PAC, Building and Construction Trade Council of California. Thank you.
I'm Ann Laser, and this is Proposition 7. You'll see this on your ballot as conforms California daylight saving time to federal law, allows legislation to change daylight saving time, period. The question, should the legislature, by a 2/3 vote, be allowed to change the daylight savings time period to permanent year-round if federal law authorizes it? The situation is, part-time daylight saving time was first imposed during World War II to save energy, and in 1949, California voters approved a ballot measure to continue it. Federal law lets states choose to stay on standard time all year long, and Arizona and Hawaii have year-round standard time. But federal law prevents states from having year-round daylight saving time. Since the year 2000, 14 countries have ended daylight saving time. The reason that it must go on the ballot is to repeal the long-ago ballot measure of 1949. The proposal is, Prop 7 is an advisory measure only and makes some changes in law. It permits and encourages the state legislature to consider year-round daylight saving time. To put it on the state ballot would require a 2/3 majority in the state legislature. The Congress and President would have to agree to it. The fiscal effect, Prop 7 would have little, if any, fiscal effect. A yes vote supports allowing the California state legislature to establish permanent year-round daylight saving time if California, by a 2/3 vote, if federal law is changed to allow for year-round daylight saving time. A no vote opposes allowing the California state legislature to establish permanent year-round daylight saving time in California by a 2/3 vote if federal law is changed to allow for year-round daylight saving time. Supporters say medical studies show that the risk of heart attack and strokes increases in the days following a time change. The change could also reduce energy costs and increase work production. The supporters include the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Green Party, the Los Angeles Times. The opponents say that this fixes a problem that doesn't exist. If If the sun rises an hour later in the winter, this will have dangerous effects on traffic and public safety, especially on children going to school in the dark. It would put California out of sync with other Western states, creating confusion. As for saving energy, while people might turn their lights on an hour later under daylight saving time, they might also run their air conditioners for an hour longer, thus ending any savings in electricity. And the opponents include the San Francisco Chronicle, the Marin IJ, the Sacramento Bee, the San Jose Mercury News, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. Neutral is the California League of Women Voters and the Marin Board of Supervisors. Campaign funding, there have been no funds contributed either in support or opposition. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Dooley, and this is Proposition 8. You'll see it on your ballot as regulates amount outpatient kidney dialysis clinics can charge for dialysis treatment. The question: should outpatient dialysis clinics be required to rebate money to private insurers if their revenue exceeds allowable costs by more than 15%? The situation: people suffering from end-stage renal disease will die without dialysis or transplantation. Patients need 3 4-hour treatments per week. The clinics are licensed by the California Department of Public Health using federal certification standards. Approximately 588 licensed clinics operate in California. The majority of the clinics are owned and run by one of 2 private, for-profit companies. The estimated annual revenue of the private companies is $3 billion. Most dialysis is paid for by Medicare and Medi-Cal. These programs pay a fixed rate established by the regulations and are close to the average cost of treatment. Private insurers also cover dialysis with payment fixed rates by negotiation with the providers. On average, these rates are multiple times higher than that paid by the government programs. The proposal: this proposition requires the companies to rebate to mostly private insurance companies if the clinic's chain's corporate annual revenues are more than 15% higher than a cap defined in the proposition. The cap is based on the total allowable costs of, quote, direct patient care services, unquote, and health care quality improvement costs. Federal law mandates certain staff and allowable expenses. Adjustments to the amount of the cap are allowed if the clinic owner-operators prove to a court that the revenue cap is so low that it is an unconstitutional taking of the value of their business. The challenger bears the burden of proving what cap would be appropriate. This proposition proposes that clinics are prohibited from refusing treatment to patients based on the source of payment for care. The fiscal effect. The fiscal impacts of this proposition are dependent upon the response of the clinics to it and on interpretations of what allowable costs are by the Department of Public Health and the courts. It appears that initially rebates will be paid, which reduces the profits of the clinics. The impact on state and local governments varies from a net savings of tens of millions of dollars to a similar net cost. A yes vote means that dialysis clinics would have their revenues limited by a formula and could be required to pay rebates to certain parties, primarily health insurance companies, that pay for dialysis treatment. A no vote means that dialysis clinics would not have their revenues limited by a formula and would not be required to pay rebates. Supporters say that Prop 8 provides incentive for dialysis clinic companies to lower their costs and improve the quality of patient care. When insurance companies are charged less for dialysis, the overall cost of insurance may decrease for everyone. Supporters include the SEIU Service Employees International, United Healthcare Workers West, California Democratic Party, the Green Party, CalPERS, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Southern California, and the California Labor Federation. Opponents say that Prop 8 sets arbitrary limits on what insurance companies pay for dialysis treatment and will not cover the complete cost of running a clinic. Clinics will reduce operations or close, depriving patients of access and increasing the risk of poor medical outcomes. Opponents include the California Chamber of Commerce, the California Hospital Association, California Medical Association, the National Kidney Foundation, and the California Republican Party. Also opposed are the San Francisco Chronicle, the Marin IJ, the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, the Sacramento Bee, San Jose Mercury News, and the LA Times. Campaign funding to date includes Californians for Kidney Dialysis Patient Protection, the SEIU United Healthcare Workers West, contributing a total of $18.5 million in support. The California Dialysis Council, consisting of patients and caregivers to protect dialysis patients, consisting of the 4 dialysis clinics, have contributed $99.4 million in opposition. Thank you. Hi, I'm Lynn Dooley, and this is Proposition 10. You'll see this proposition on your ballot as expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. The question: should the current state law limiting the scope of city or county rent control ordinances be repealed and replaced with one that gives them more authority to limit rental rates that property owners can charge new tenants? The situation: the legislature passed Costa-Hawkins in 1995. The law said cities and counties could limit rent increases, but rent control did not apply to single-family homes or condos of any age, or to multifamily buildings first occupied after 1995. The proposal: this proposition repeals the Costa-Hawkins Rental Act. It allows cities and counties to regulate rents for whatever type of housing property they choose, no matter when it was built or what type of building it is. It does not change existing rent control laws. It does not create rent control laws. The proposition retains the landlord's right to a fair rate of return on their investment. The fiscal effect: it is unknown as of now, but potentially significant changes in state and local governments' tax revenues may result. Net decrease more than likely net increase. Potential increase in local government's costs of up to tens of millions of dollars per year in the long term are likely paid by fees on owners of rental housing. Supporters say that while the measure may not result in additional affordable housing units, it does allow local governments to respond to the state housing crisis in ways appropriate to their community's needs. It is one of the multiple strategies to address the significant housing shortages that exist across California. Supporters include the AIDS Health Foundation, which is a supporter of causes outside of the AIDS issues, and the organization who placed this on the ballot. The Sierra Club, the California Teachers Association, the California Nurses Association, SEIU Coalition for Affordable Housing, ACLU, the California League of Women Voters, the California Democratic Party, the LA Times, and the Sacramento Bee. Opponents say abolishing Costa-Hawkins will aggravate the state's housing shortage by discouraging new construction and encouraging some landlords to take existing units off the market. Ruining developers' projects would slow already scarce affordable construction for low-income people. Opponents include the NAACP, the California Chamber of Commerce, the California Realtors Association, the California Apartment Owners Association, the Rental Housing Association, State Building and Construction Trades Council, the San Francisco Chronicle, Marin IJ, San Jose Mercury News, Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, and the California Taxpayers Association. Campaign funding: a total of $22.7 million has been contributed in support, $20 million from the AIDS Foundation, and the rest from the California Nurses, California Teachers, and the Alliance of California for Community Empowerment Action. A total of $59 million has been contributed in opposition, $40 million from the California Apartment Owners Association, $17 million from the Coalition of Housing Advocates, and the rest from the California Rental Housing Association and the Apartment Association of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ann Laser, and this is Proposition 11. You will see this on your ballot as requires private sector emergency ambulance employees to remain on call during work breaks, eliminates certain employer liability. The question is, should the Labor Code be amended to allow private ambulance employees to remain on call during meal and rest breaks, and to exempt companies from liability for violations of existing law? The situation is that California labor law requires that hourly employees have uninterrupted meal and rest breaks, but these laws have not traditionally been applied to private ambulance employees. Historically, they remain on call during breaks to respond to 911 emergencies or to be repositioned to ensure quick response times. However, in 2016, the California Supreme Court ruled that having security guards remain on call violated state labor laws requiring breaks to be off-duty and uninterruptible, even in an emergency. Several active lawsuits by private ambulance employees over break violations might have similar outcomes, forcing a change in industry practices. Ambulance companies say if breaks cannot be interrupted, around 25% more ambulances will be needed. About 75% of emergency medical services in California are provided by private ambulances. The rest are through fire departments. Marin County's emergency medical services are fire service based, so this measure wouldn't apply directly to us. The proposal, it amends the labor laws to allow private sector ambulance employees to remain on duty during paid meal and rest breaks. It regulates timing of meal breaks. It eliminates employers' liability for violations of existing law retroactively in actions pending on or after October 25th, 2017. Requires employers to provide emergency medical personnel with additional education, emergency training, and mental health services. Fiscal impact. The Legislative Analyst's Office says Prop 11 could save local government tens of millions of dollars annually based on projected costs for additional ambulances if uninterrupted work breaks are enforced. A yes vote means private ambulance companies could continue to require employees to be on call during breaks. Exemption from existing law would be retroactive. A no vote means laws requiring uninterrupted breaks could be applied to employees of private ambulance companies. Supporters say Prop 11 puts into law the long-standing industry practice of paying EMTs and paramedics to remain reachable during breaks in case of an emergency, just like firefighters and police officers. This is needed because a recent California court ruling could stop this practice. It is essential that emergency personnel are prepared to respond with life-saving medical care during mass casualty events. Proposition 11 mandates training to meet emergency standards. Supporters include America Medical Response, largest medical transportation firm in the country. They put this on the ballot. The California Ambulance Association, the California Republican Party, the Los Angeles Times, the Sacramento Bee, the San Jose Mercury News, and the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. The opponents say private ambulance companies are trying to carve out an exemption from California labor laws. Ambulance workers who have sued employees over work break violations should have their day in court. Pending legislation initiated by ambulance companies and supported by the Ambulance Workers Union aims to address this problem. Should be determined in the legislature, not by a ballot measure. Opponents include the California State Labor Federation, the California Teachers Association, California Democratic Party, the Green Party, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Marin IJ. Campaign funding. The American Medical Response has donated $21.9 million support as of October 3rd. No contributions have been made to oppose to date. Thank you. Hello, I'm Ann Laser, and this is Proposition 12. You will see this on your ballot as establishes new standards for confinement of specified farm animals, bans sale of non-complying products. The question is, should the state revise its current farm animal confinement laws? The situation is, in 2008, California voters approved a ballot initiative, Prop 2, to ban the confinement of egg-laying hens, pregnant pigs, and calves raised for veal in a manner that did not allow them to turn around freely, lie down, stand up, and fully extend their wings or limbs. Prop 2 did not provide specific square feet when defining prohibited confinement. Rather, the size restrictions are based on animal behavior. Plus, Prop 2 intended a cage-free standard, but that language was not included. In 2013, the California Department of Food and Agriculture issued a regulation to require in-state or out-of-state egg producers to sell eggs in California to provide egg-laying hens with at least 0.81 square feet per bird. The proposal? Prop 12 would, by 2020, comply with the specific standard measurements set out in the proposition: 1 square foot for cages of egg-laying hens, and 43 square feet for calves raised for veal, and 24 square feet for pregnant pigs. By 2022, it would require that egg-laying hens in California be housed in cage-free housing systems. Eggs from other states would have to conform to California's confinement standards in order to be sold in California. It would designate the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the California Department of Public Health as jointly responsible for the measure's implementation. The fiscal effect? There would be potential decrease in state income tax revenues from farm businesses due to expenses incurred to meet the space requirements, likely not more than several $1 million annually, costs up to $10 million annually to enforce the measure by the California Department of Food and Agriculture instead of local authorities. Consumer prices may increase for eggs, pork, and veal while farmers in California and other states change their housing systems to meet the measure. Prop 12's supporters say, Proposition 12 would strengthen and clarify California's decade-old farm animal anti-cruelty law, prevent designated farm animals from being housed inhumanely in small cages for their entire lives, reduce the risk of people being sickened by food poisoning and factory farm pollution by preventing overcrowding of animals in small spaces. And supporters include the Marin Humane Society, the Marin Board of Supervisors, the Humane Society of the United States, the American SPCA, and the San Francisco SPCA, the Democratic Party, the San Jose Mercury News, the Marin IJ, the Sierra Club of California. Opponents say Prop 12 would repeal Prop 2, which was considered too vague, and allow egg factories to give each hen only 1 square foot of cage or floor space. It mandates full compliance by 2022, a too narrow time frame that could result in supply disruptions, price spikes, and shortages of eggs, pork products, and veal. It would actually allow farms to keep the egg-laying hens in cages until 2022, at which time factory farms would still be able to confine uncaged hens to massive, crowded sheds with only 1 square foot of space per bird. That argument made by PETA. Opponents include the Association of California Egg Farmers, Friends of Animals, Humane Farming Association, National Pork Producers Council, California Republican Party, San Francisco Chronicles, Santa Rosa Press Democrat, Sacramento Bee, and People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. That's PETA. Prop 10 campaign funding, $6.1 million in support from the Humane Society of the United States, individuals, Deborah Stone and Kyle Vogt, the ASPCA, and the Humane League. $550,000 in opposition from the Humane Farming Action Fund. Thank you.